The Beautiful Merciless Lady, from Miss Bracegirdle and Others, by Stacy Aumonier. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Michael Maggs. The Beautiful Merciless Lady. There are few men strong enough to withstand success. She is the beautiful, merciless lady. At the first tap on the shoulder, the victim of her favour rocks and staggers. She glances into his eyes, and unless he is a creature of superb control, he loses his head. He plunges hither and thither, clutching at the golden aura in which she seems to float. He feels himself a thing apart, transcendent, impervious, invincible. The world of pygmy men around him are merely the drab background to a brilliant picture. He can do no wrong. The standards of morality and behaviour which these others have set up are not his standards. He is the darling of the gods, and he follows his mistress up and up, leaping from crag to crag on the slope of the sunlit mountain. Whither? He never puts this query to himself. He lives in a welter of exultation. All things are charged with the magic of 1,000 revelations. The younger he is when she first meets him, the more devastating are her allurements. Possibly this is why so many infant prodigies never emerge from the infant stage. She stifles them with the surfeit of her riches, the little bores. She likes men best in their early manhood, when she may flirt with them at her leisure. The old she seldom troubles about. They know her wiles, and are frequently too cunning or too wary. Oh, but the young man, still with beauty and health and clean, strong limbs. It was such a one that she met in the person of my friend Johnny Lydgate. She led him away and destroyed him as completely as the rose is destroyed by the breath of autumn winds. There was no reason why he should have been destroyed, no exterior cause. He had 1,000 friends and no enemy, except the one which she created in himself. Everything tended to produce in Johnny Lydgate a creature of gentle bearing, of sanity and equipoise. His father was a delightful old gentleman, a librarian in a country town, who kept homing pigeons and compiled anthologies. His mother and sister were charming and lovable women. They formed a united, devoted family. It was at Stoneleigh College that I first met Lydgate. We were inseparable companions for nearly 4 years. My recollections of him there were those of a pleasant, companionable, almost negative schoolboy. He excelled at nothing, and displayed no ambitions. He was affectionate, intelligent, and amusing, but at work and sport he never rose above mediocrity. We know a man's body by the familiar regard of its movements and expressions. We know the quality of his mind as it is revealed to us through his opinions and observations, but it is strange how we may get to know a man's soul by some instant of revelation. We may think we are entirely familiar with him. We may have known him intimately for 20 years or more, but one day we suddenly experience a scrap of recognition of something deeper. It may be a phrase that he employs, a gesture, an attitude, some queer telepathic message from his eyes, but in that instant we realize that we know our man for the first time. All our values concerning him become readjusted from that moment. There came such a moment to me when Lydgate and I were in our last term at Stoneleigh. I remember the moment vividly. It was after our inter-house football match, in which Lydgate had played very well, far above his average. Our housemaster, who was a very popular man, ran up, and slapping Johnny on the back, called out, "Bravo, Lydgate, bravo, bravo!" and as he turned away, I saw my school-chum look up at the sky, and a queer expression came over his face, a kind of drunken egoism, and I suddenly thought to myself, so that is Johnny Lydgate after all, and I thought I knew. For a time after leaving school we lost touch with each other. Boys are very apt to make vows of eternal friendship, and then, well, other things happen along. Writing is such a fag. Johnny went to Paris to study art, whilst I walked the hospitals. However, he had not been in Paris for a year. He only wrote to me once, when his father died. As may be imagined, a man who specializes in homing pigeons and anthologies does not leave a fortune. The Lydgate family found themselves in distressed circumstances. Lydgate was recalled from Paris and had to do something immediately to earn money. He took the position manfully, and with that cheery good humour that was characteristic of him. He obtained a place as an assistant to a firm of decorative designers, hoping that his meagre training might be of some assistance. His remuneration was naturally quite nominal, but the firm held out prospects of advancement. He stayed with this firm for 7 years, and gave no evidence of special ability. He jogged along stolidly, learning to make pleasant, undistinguished designs for wallpapers, cretonnes, and furniture. He was very popular in the studio where he worked, on account of his unfailing good humour, unselfishness, and gift of fun. He distinguished himself most by making caricatures of his colleagues and imitating their voices and mannerisms. He displayed no particular ambitions other than to jog along and have as good a time as his limited income would allow. We saw each other occasionally, and when I at last got my degrees, I bought a practice in West Kensington, not far from where Lydgate had his rooms. He was at that time earning 300 a year. The house I had taken was a tall, gaunt place in an inconspicuous street. I was unmarried, and the place was obviously too large for my requirements. So I had the inspiration to suggest to Lydgate that he should occupy the upper part and pay me whatever he was paying for his diggings. He accepted my offer with alacrity. His mother and sisters were still living in the country. The arrangement was full of promise. We had great fun arranging, furnishing, and decorating the rooms. Lydgate spent his evenings and Sundays doing all his own painting and decorating, and he also insisted on doing mine. I was not convinced that the delicate scheme of greys which he evolved for my consulting room, with its frieze of stencilled peacocks and yew trees, was quite in keeping with the dignity of my bold brass plate on the front door, but then I knew nothing about art, and Lydgate was so kind in the matter that I let it pass. I had a boy to open the door, and an old woman kept the place reasonably clean, and she used to cook an evening meal, which we had together. That was a very happy time for both of us, and it lasted some years. My brass plate did not seem to impress the neighbourhood as I should have liked. Sometimes, when I opened the door to people, they used to ask for the doctor. Once I attended Lydgate when he had a feverish chill, and he said my bedside manners were appalling. But gradually it got about that young Dr. Berners was not such a fool as you might imagine. Some said he was a fairly good, straight, sensible doctor, who took trouble with his patients. At the end of the first year, the practice began to show signs of developing. It was at this time that Lydgate had an affair with a married ballad singer. I could never quite get to the root of the matter, neither could I understand his infatuation. She was a fair, plump person, with magnificent neck and shoulders, a brilliantly clear but unsympathetic voice, and an almost unique gift of self-concentration. She had this wonderful voice, but she knew nothing, not even about music. She used to wear tiny paste diamonds early in the evening, and a shiny vegetable silk jumper which made her person appear even more capacious than it really was. Her name was Betty Brant, and she had a husband who travelled in automobile accessories. As I say, I do not know the details of this regrettable affair. I only know that it was very passionate, rather involved, and went on for nearly 6 months. At the end of that time something happened. Whether they quarrelled, or whether the traveller in automobile accessories intervened, I cannot say. But Johnny Lydgate was desperately unhappy. He sulked and moped and would not go out except backward and forward to his work. Then one day he did not even go to that. He told me surlily that he had left. He gave no reason. He sat about at home and apparently drowned his sorrow in charcoal and watercolours. He sketched and drew all day, things which he said he never got an opportunity of doing at that confounded shop. I thought it as well to leave him alone. He paid his rent for the first week and then asked me for credit, which I naturally acceded. One Saturday morning I went up to his room and found the walls covered with drawings and sketches. In my poor opinion they seemed to be a brilliant advance on anything he had done before. I said so, and he seemed pleased, and announced that he was going to hawk his work around to editors and try to start up on his own. I wished him the best of luck. At the end of a fortnight his campaign had apparently met with a fair measure of success. He told me he had some commissions, and he hoped soon to be able to let me have some money. The next morning he came into the dining-room. His face was crinkled with suppressed laughter, his eyes brilliant with exultant glee. He unfolded a drawing and held it up on the wall. It was a caricature of Betty Brant. It was the most brilliant, and at the same time the cruellest thing I have ever seen. It was no portraiture, but you could not mistake it. I had never liked Betty Brant, and I was on the point of protesting, and then the realization that this drawing, in any case, meant the end of the Betty affair gave me such a feeling of relief that I laughed almost hysterically. John and I stood side by side laughing until the tears rolled down our cheeks. Poor Betty! He seemed freer after that, and worked assiduously at the orders he had in hand. I'm afraid they were not very remunerative. It was a long time before he proffered any further contribution towards the upkeep of our establishment, and when he did so, it was with many groans and apologies for the smallness of the amount. I told him that he was not to worry about it. My practice was beginning to pay fairly well, and it made a great difference to me to have a companion. For a year I observed Lydgate's grim struggle with his artistic conscience. The point was that for the work he wanted to do there was no demand. But there was work which he could do, for which there was a demand. The latter gradually absorbed his energies. He refused to sponge on me. In 18 months' time he had wiped out all debts and was beginning to make headway. He appeared to have resigned himself to a life of steady toil. I found him particularly companionable at that time. I think the Betty Brant affair had done him good. He was calmer, quicker in his sympathies, more tolerant and reflective. He still had his moments of gay fun. His capacity for fooling was enlarged, his perceptions and discernments more incisive. When I was 30 and Lydgate 29, we both seemed to have settled down to a solid professional life. He was making 500 or 600 a year, and had even saved a little. I was making rather more, and we had improved the conditions of our household. We now had a general, as well as a charwoman and a page boy. On occasions we actually entertained, bought reserved seats for the theatre, and went away for week-end jaunts. And then, without any ostentatious forewarning, Viola appeared on the scene. She glided into our lives with the inevitableness of a portent in a Greek drama. She had occupied her place on the stage before we had realized the significance of her entrance. She was the daughter of an old fellow practitioner, a Dr. Bracegirdle, with whom I had been on friendly terms, and who had been extremely kind to me when I started my practice. His wife was dead, but he and his daughter lived 2 streets away, and we indulged in those little social amenities which busy professional people always seem to find time for. Occasional dinners, a game of bridge, a little music. Viola sang divinely. I was, of course, the first to meet her, and I sang her praises to such good purpose that Lydgate would not rest until he met her. And then, of course, a little trouble began. There was never a gentler, fairer, more adorable woman than Viola Bracegirdle. She brought into a room a feeling of complete tranquillity, warmed with the sun-kissed humours of virginal youth, seeking for ever surprises and revelations, giving out love and sympathy, and drawing it to herself. I cannot tell you the agony and ecstasy of those months that followed. She visited us, sometimes with her father, sometimes alone. We visited her, sometimes together, sometimes alone. It took some weeks to realize that we both adored her. What was to happen? Well, I think we played the game fairly. Each knew of the other's infatuation. It was a fair field and no favour. One does learn something, after all, at an English public school. We bore each other no animosity, we took no unfair advantages. And what of Viola? For some time the pendulum appeared to swing backward and forward. There was no gainsaying the fact that she really was fond of both of us. But the pendulum of that tenderer passion does not swing backward and forward. It has a bias, a rhythm of its own. And we each knew that the day would come when the pendulum would not swing back to one of us. Hey-ho! I hardly need tell you the outcome of this contest. You will have foreseen it already. In the social arena, when Lydgate chose to shine, I was no match for him. He had all the advantages of good looks, engaging manners, and that genius for always being his best in her presence. He shone and sparkled and glowed, whilst I sat dumb and dour and angry with myself. I could not be surprised when the pendulum swung his way and did not return to me. They got married the following spring, and after a honeymoon in Brittany went to live in a flat at Barnes. We visited each other occasionally, and the complete success of their union emphasized the loneliness of my own dismal household. They were devoted to each other and bewilderingly happy. When the possessive sense is outraged, work is our only friend and physician. I worked and worked and worked, and the practice grew, but oh, the emptiness of those waking hours. The following year they had a child, a boy, with those lustre-blue eyes of the father. Their happiness appeared complete. Lydgate was still doing reasonably well with what he called his solid commercial stuff. He seemed to have put all other ambitions behind him. As a social problem, I would have wagered that there would be nothing more to solve concerning him. In short, that he was going to settle down and live happily ever afterward. But the face of the Sphinx is inscrutable. It all occurred so surprisingly suddenly. I believe its first inception came about through a caricature he did of Lord Balfour. Balfour is an easy person to caricature, and this was not one of Lydgate's best, but the drawing was published in a weekly and attracted the attention of a well-known Jewish gentleman who called himself Maurice Loffley, and who dealt in other people's brains. He asked to see some of Lydgate's work, and he admired it extravagantly, especially the caricature of Betty Brant. But he said, "My dear boy, it's celebrities we want, famous people. Do some, and I'll place them for you." The outcome was not immediately successful. Lydgate did do some, and some of them were placed, but Mr. Loffley was not very satisfactory over his business arrangements, and Lydgate ended up by doing a caricature of Mr. Loffley himself, which was the best and cruellest thing he had turned out since Betty. It was published in another illustrated weekly, and caused joy to all of Mr. Loffley's colleagues and rivals. The success of this rapidly led to others. Apart from his skill as a draftsman, Lydgate had a keen wit and an adroit gift of literary exposition. He worked out some wonderful jibes at various famous people. His drawings began to be talked about and to be in demand by editors and publishers. Their commercial value rose in direct ratio. Barely 6 months after the incident of Mr. Loffley, could his name possibly have been Moritz Loeffler? Johnny Lydgate had a one-man show at the Regent Galleries. The exhibition was a most remarkable success. A publisher bought the copyright of the entire collection right out, and nearly all the originals were sold at high prices. The press came out with headlines about the discovery of a new satirist. Artists and society people flocked to see the exhibition. On the Saturday afternoon following the opening, I was in the gallery talking to Johnny and his wife and Mr. Burroughs, the owner of the galleries. They were all flushed and excited, and Viola was looking proud and very pretty. Suddenly Mr. Burroughs dived across the room and returned with a tall, striking-looking girl. I did not hear Mr. Burroughs introduce her, but of course I knew her well by sight. She was a very famous and intellectual woman, a daughter of one of His Majesty's ministers. Her photograph was always gracing the illustrated papers. I saw her shake Johnny's hand, then I heard her deep contralto voice exclaim with feeling, "Oh, Mr. Lydgate, I am so pleased to make your acquaintance. I think your drawings are simply gorgeous." I could not hear Johnny's reply. They talked for several minutes, and she passed on. Then I saw him stagger a few steps and look up at the skylight. My mind immediately reverted to a certain fateful moment at Stoneleigh, on that spring day after the inter-house match, when he was congratulated on his fine play, and I saw upon his face the identical expression. He was like a man dazed and drunken with the riches of his own ego. Instead of the open field and the cheering boys, he was swaying under the narcotic of a more pervading flattery, brilliant and clever people, the faint perfume of a richly dressed woman, admiring and significant glances. That is he, that's Lydgate, Lydgate himself. The beautiful and merciless lady had begun to put her spell upon him. What astonished me was the rapidity with which the poison worked. Within a few months he became a celebrity. He was just 33, at the very fullness of his powers. His popularity was no doubt greatly accelerated by the charm of his personality, his good looks, genial manners, and quaint humour. He was immediately taken up by a certain Lady Stradling, a wealthy and adventurous American woman who adored lions. One invitation led to another. He was always out at some dinner or reception. He developed the club manner. He joined several bohemian clubs, where he became extremely popular. He would give an entertainment at the drawing-board, making caricatures of people present, and keeping up a running fire of most amusing chatter. He began to live extravagantly, but even then he was making more money than he could spend. At first Viola entered with zest into these manifestations of social advancement. She accompanied him to many dinners and functions, but gradually they began to pall upon her, and she let him go by himself. I remember meeting him one night the following winter at the Wombats Club. I was enormously impressed by the change in him. I was there when he arrived, and I saw him enter the room. He was still good-looking, but his face had become looser and a little coarser. He was greeted by cries of, "Hello, Johnny! Good old Johnny! Who's that? Don't you know? That's Lydgate, Johnny Lydgate!" He tried to appear impervious to these manifestations, but at the back of his eye I could detect the slow, greedy satisfaction of the man whose cup of happiness is overflowing. He spoke to me pleasantly, but his eyes wandered, seeking distinguished names and faces. He was not particularly proud at being seen in conversation with a suburban doctor. "Who's that? Excuse me, old chap, I want a word with Edwin Ray. Hello, Ray, old boy." Of course Edwin Ray is familiar to you. You may see his picture on all the hoardings, the famous comedian. Later, Johnny did one of his inimitable sketches, a huge success, a wonderful hit at Edwin Ray. Afterward, he sat at a table near me drinking rum and water. He had developed a rather affected style of dress, with a voluminous blue and white stock and peg-top trousers. Occasionally he made a note in a sketch-book, or flung an epigram at a neighbour. The din of the club increased. It was difficult to see across the room for smoke. And suddenly I thought of Viola. Was he neglecting her? Was he cruel to her? It was very late when I took my departure, and I was crazy to say something to him. I did indeed manage to mumble something to him about this kind of life being bad for one's nervous energies. He took another sip of rum and said, "It's a lovely life, old boy, a lovely life." I left him there. The memory of that evening disturbed me. I felt that my position as an old friend justified me in indulging in some course of interference. A few days later I called and found Viola alone. I thought she seemed a little abstracted and self-conscious with me. We talked of different things, and then I blurted out, "I think Johnny is having too many late nights. He didn't look well the other evening." She bit her lip and said nothing. Suddenly she rose, pressed my arm, and turned away. She was crying. I went up to her. "Tell me, Viola, is anything wrong?" She dabbed her eyes. "No, oh no. It's only that it's just what you say. Too many late nights, and sometimes he drinks too much. He has headaches and is sullen. There's nothing else, Tom. He loves me as much as ever, I am certain. He hasn't the strength, that's all." Oh, the beautiful, merciless lady! She took nearly 3 years to destroy my friend. You may say that drink was the cause of his ultimate downfall. Drink certainly accelerated it, but was not the basic cause. He was drunk before he began to drink, drunk with the rich wine of her charms. Have you ever seen a man destroyed in that way? The spectacle is not edifying. He went rapidly from bad to worse. A miracle is how he retained his powers as a draftsman almost to the end. From a pleasant, good-looking young man he developed into a puffy, distinguished-looking Georgian roué. The world spoiled him, and he hadn't the strength to stand up against it. The standards of morality and behaviour which these other men set up did not apply to Johnny Lydgate. Oh dear, no. He was above it all, a thing apart, a genius. the observed of all observers. Sometimes he will be out all night, sometimes he will be lost for days together. Then he would turn up, be very ill, and go to bed. Viola would minister to him, give him hot water bottles, and he would cry and become maudlin. He would swear not to do it again. He loved her, oh, how he loved her! And she would stroke his temple and whisper, "Strength, dear, strength. You must try. Oh, you must try, for my sake." Of course he would try. How ill he felt! And the days passed, and his physical strength returned to him. Came also the little whispers of the outside world, an invitation to Lady Stradling's, telephone messages from anxious publishers, the sale of 2 watercolours at a record price, the house dinner at the Wombats Club. Just this once, oh, just this once, Viola. Back he went, lost to the claims of common decency. His face became lined and blotchy, he trembled in his movements, the veins in his arms and his hands stood out like knotted cords. To the very end she tended him, shielded him, mothered and fought for him. The world will never know what that woman suffered and endured. She says that he was never cruel to her, except by his neglect and lack of consideration. In his behaviour toward her he was always tender and passionate, contrite, disgusted with himself. He knew quite well what he was doing. It was not that he loved Viola any the less, but that he was clay in the hands of that more powerful mistress, the glamour of publicity, to be talked about, to be pointed at, to be praised in the press. Dr. Bracegirdle and I did what we could. We advised and argued and cajoled and even bullied. He had other real friends too. Everybody did what he could, but it was of no avail. When he sank into that last illness from which he never recovered, I visited him one day, and sat regarding the spectacle of that unmatched form and feature of blown youth blasted with ecstasy. He opened his eyes and looked at me. He gave me a quick glance of appreciation. Suddenly he smiled in his old way and whispered, "It was worth while, old boy." Some men are made that way. They must crowd their life into a capsule and swallow it. They know they are wooing destruction, and it is worth while. Not for them the steady rhythm of an ordered life. The beautiful, merciless lady pipes the tune, and they must dance. In spite of all, Johnny Lydgate remains a precious and endearing memory to us, to Viola and me. When I married her, 2 years after his death, we went abroad for a while, and on our return I acquired a practice at nailing on the Sussex Downs, and there we built our home. The boy is a perfect joy to us. He has his father's eyes and vivacious manners, and something of his mother's warmth and tenderness. The study of his welfare and training is a constant source of affectionate discussion. What will he become? What lies before him? We are full of hope and tremulous surmises. Only at times do the old doubts and fears assail us. He is 20 now, and next term he leaves Cambridge. On this desk, as I write, there is a letter from him, written to his mother. "Mother dear, what is all this about the Indian Civil Service? I should simply hate it. Fancy seeing all one's life in perspective, knowing exactly how much you will be earning when you're 45, knowing that you'll get a pension when you're 60 or 70 or whatever it is. Who cares what happens when they are 70? No, old thing, Tony Stevens is going to Paris to study art. I think I should like to join him. You know I can draw, don't you? Smithers thinks my life studies are pretty useful. I have a feeling that I might do well. Anyway, we'll talk it over when I come down. Crowds of love, mother dear, your loving son. And I sit here, turning it over and biting my pen. He has his father's lustre-blue eyes. How would you answer this letter? Can one advise the young? End of The Beautiful Merciless Lady.